One of the defining moments of my life, like the greatest moments of my life, happened in a little town called Williams Lake in the interior of BC. And I was up in Williams Lake for a co-op university work term. Didn't know a lot of people, but the town would have this annual Christmas party. And so I thought, what have I got to lose? I'm going to go. So I go to this Christmas party, walk into this gym that's literally exploding with crowds of people. But the crazy thing was is that there was like this spotlight that was just aimed at one person. Now I had seen this person a couple of times before, had talked to them. I wasn't probably even sure what their name was, but all of a sudden there they are in this room full of people, this gym full of people, and the spotlight's like right on them. And so, hey, this is a sign. I walked over and asked if I could sit with her. And I sat down beside her, and probably, much to the frustration of everyone around us, we just talked through the night. We had like this amazing conversation that I don't know anything else, what Christmas songs were sung, whatever else was a part of the program, but that was an amazing night. Now, the really odd thing is that at the end of the night, we just kind of went our separate ways. No appointments, no dates booked in the calendar, nothing. But I went home that night, and it was like I just couldn't get my mind off of her. I just thought of her all the night through. Maybe I was just so energized by her that I never slept. But I think it was more like I just dreamed the whole night through of Sandy. And first thing in the morning, like the first thing I had to do was get on the phone and call her and see if I could make an appointment for lunch, because I just needed to tell her what I was feeling about her and what that previous night had meant to me. Well, what happened that night? The word that I like to use to describe my experience is the word captivated. That there was something about Sandy that I just couldn't get off my mind. That there was something about her, probably more accurately, that was just on my heart, because I had this incredible experience with her, and I just had this sense that there was something about her that was so different than any other sort of experience that I had had in life. Now, to be captivated, it means literally to have someone or something turn your head or attract you or win you over. And maybe you agree with me that when you're captivated by something or someone, it's like life can take on this completely different quality, this different experience. That when you're captivated by someone, it somehow puts the life into a different perspective. And it's almost like you begin to experience life on a different level. You're living life on this different level. That when you're captivated, it's all of a sudden, as the focus is on this one thing or one person, that even other important things seem to fade into the background. Being captivated can be very transforming in life. And so as we think about this idea of being captivated, I'd like you to look with me at an experience, an encounter that a woman has. And I'd like you to think about how life-changing it was for her. We're not told about this woman's name, but being captivated transformed her life in the most liberating, the most freeing way imaginable. And the reason her experience is so worth looking at is that we can experience a similar kind of transformation in our life as well. That is, we are captivated by what this woman, and I would say specifically by who this woman was captivated by, we can experience transformation in our lives as well. Now, we read about her experience in what is called the Gospel of Luke. And if you're not familiar with the Bible is basically broken down into two parts. There is what we call the Old Testament, and then there's the New Testament. The New Testament is largely concerned about Jesus and Jesus working through his church. And it begins with these 4 letters, or these 4 Gospels. And the Gospels are really biographies that are written about Jesus. And so we have Matthew, we have Mark, we have Luke, we have John. Well, the interesting thing about the Gospel of Luke is that Luke was a doctor. And Luke says right at the beginning of what he begins to write about Jesus, he says, I investigated because I wanted to give an accurate account. And so it's within this purpose that Luke has that we begin reading about this encounter that this woman had with Jesus. And it goes like this. One of the Pharisees, now a Pharisee in Jesus' time was someone that was really concerned, like genuinely concerned about their Jewish religion. They were, to a large extent, they were experts in the law, experts in their religion. They were seen as religious teachers. And so we read, one of the Pharisees asked Jesus to have dinner with him. So Jesus went to his home and sat down to eat. When a certain immoral woman from that city heard that Jesus was eating there, she brought a beautiful alabaster jar filled with expensive perfume. Then she knelt behind him at his feet, weeping. Her tears fell on his feet, and she wiped them off with her hair. Then she kept kissing his feet by putting perfume on them. And you just try to imagine the scene for a moment, right? You know, there's this party that's being given, and Jesus is invited to this party. But in some ways, it's not like the spotlight is on Jesus or Simon, who we'll get to in a minute, as much as it's on this woman, this woman who is presented to us, who is described to us by this label. She has a label, and her label is immoral, sinful. Now, labels can be, and often are, terrible things. They can be given to us, or we can actually put them on ourselves. But in many respects, our labels can very easily start to define who we are as people. Now, here's the immoral woman. Here's the label, right? The immoral woman. And what we discover as this story develops is that we're not even given her name. She's not even introduced. We're never told her name. All we know her by is this label. Immoral, sinful. And this story, this account that we read about, becomes even more incredible. Because apart from the label even, just by virtue of being a woman in that time and in that culture, she never would have received an invitation to the party, right? It never would have been in her mail. She could cook the meal, she could, serve the meal, she could clean up afterwards, but she's never going to get an invitation to the party. It would have been one of those kinds of events, one of those kinds of clubs where over the door it was like, men only. Women not allowed. She never would have been invited to the party. At the very best, she would have just been the hired help. So just imagine for a moment what it would have meant for her to break all those social and cultural and religious protocols of her day. Never mind political correctness, right? Never mind having to sort of run the gauntlet of these religious and probably judgmental men, because she wanted to be with Jesus, because she wanted to experience Jesus, to get through all of that just because of how deeply she was drawn to Jesus. Now you just hold this image, this picture of woman in your mind, surrounded by these religious men who all know who she is. Like, they read the label, they see the label, they know her by the label. Perhaps even they're the ones that gave her the label. And so here she is. And we read, then she knelt behind Jesus at his feet. Now, in that day and time, you would have reclined during a meal. I don't know if that's good for digestion or what, but that's the practice of that day is you would have reclined at the table, your head towards the table, your feet away from the table. And so there she is. She knelt behind Jesus at his feet as he's reclining at this meal. Weeping, her tears fell on his feet, and she wiped them off with her hair. Then she kept kissing his feet and putting perfume on them. It was probably like all the air was sucked from the room, right? You've ever been in a situation that was just shocking? It's like everybody gasps, like, what does she think she's doing? Like, who does she think she is? We know who she is, but what does she think she's doing? How could she possibly think that she could even come into this room? Never mind, in front of us, this incredibly personal, intimate act between a man and a woman who are not married. Like, talk about culturally incorrect. Talk about breaking all the rules. Well, what makes this counter so amazing, so incredible, is literally this woman's label. It is a shocking twist to the story. Most of us know what it's like to have a label. You know, maybe that label has even been with us from our childhood, or maybe a label was given to us in our childhood. Maybe it's one of the reasons that a lot of us, we think, I'm not going to that high school that high school reunion, because well, there was that label, and I don't want to think about that label. People tend not to see past our labels. They have a way of defining us. When we are known by our label, the chances are we're not really known for ourselves. It's hard to break out of our labels. Labels constrict us and restrict us. Labels can box us in. Labels can prevent us from being what we can be, the potential of what we can be. They tend to be a weight that we live under, or an expectation that we live under our labels. So here's this woman, this immoral woman. But here's the thing. No matter what the cost, no matter what it takes, no matter what protocols, what customs, what barriers she has to get over or get through, she is willing to do whatever it takes to pour out her love and her gratitude. It just seeps out of her, it just flows out of her on the feet of Jesus. That there is something about Jesus, something that she has experienced with Jesus, from Jesus, that she has never experienced, that she has never got from anything else or anyone else before. And it is big enough, it is powerful enough, it is deep enough in her life that it draws her, it captivates her. Jesus captivates her to engage in this incredibly outrageous, radical act of love. I would say that she's captivated by Jesus, to the extent that she is set free from the label that her life up until this point in time has been defined by, has been described by, has been constricted by, defined by. Because she's captivated by Jesus, her life is transformed. There's this transformation that is going on, and she has been set free. But as we see in the story, that there is this other individual as well. And there's such an incredible contrast between Simon, the Pharisee, the religious expert, and this woman. Now, Simon, we're given a name for, right? We know him as Simon. We don't just know him by a label. He holds the party. And this is a big deal. Jesus is in town. And no matter what you think about him, people are talking about him. No matter what you think about him, people have opinions about him. And even though we're not introduced to Simon by his label, he wears one. He is a Pharisee, and as we've said in Jesus' day, and it's somewhat simplistic, but in some ways we could say the label is religious expert. He's the expert of religion. That's how we know Simon. Now, religion is really kind of a funny thing. Religion, it looks good on the outside. In fact, religion is good on the outside. Simon, for instance, would have been a man who cared deeply about his faith. He would have cared deeply about the Hebrew scriptures. He would have studied them. He would have memorized them. He would have debated them. He cared about the law and the regulations as he understood them and their nuances. And too often, we can read about an experience like this encounter, and we can get lost in the extremes. We can get messed up with the extremes. We read about an experience like this, and Simon, who Jesus comes down very hard on, and we think, oh, okay, rules, they're bad, law, it's bad. But you have to notice here that the point that Jesus is making is not condoning promiscuity, or Tinder, or Ashley Madison. So what is the problem then with religion? What do we see here? What is the problem with, why does Jesus come down so hard on Simon? Because religion is such an insidious disease. And by that, I mean that when we've been bitten by the bug of religion, it seems like we are the last person to understand, to be able to identify that we are the ones that have the virus. So here's the contrast, right? This immoral woman walks in where she's not allowed, never mind invited, and with her tears she expresses this outrageous act of love. You know, she is breaking so many customs in her day that you can't even begin to add them up. And here is the very thing that exposes and shows up Simon, because Jesus tells a story. And he says a man loaned money to two people, 500 pieces of silver to one, so boom, the scale's down here, and 50 pieces of silver to the other. Significant amounts of money, but you think 500 pieces, 50 pieces of silver. But the story goes on. But neither of them could repay him. And so he kindly forgave them both, canceling their debt. Who do you suppose loved him more after that? Now, it's an interesting story, isn't it? Because the lender, the banker, he forgives both debts. And we think to ourselves, oh man, I want a banker like that. Like, how do I find a banker like that? And then Jesus asks the question in the light of forgiving that debt. Jesus' question, which will love him more? And of course, we think to ourselves, that's a trick question. Like, whoever loves their banker? No offense to bankers, but actually it's not a trick question. It is a very straightforward question and a very obvious answer to when it comes to banking, but probably just as significantly when it comes to life. Because the guy that literally is doing cartwheels in the parking lot, you know, is the guy that was invited into the bank manager's office and, you know, expecting the worst, was told, hey, we've decided to forgive your debt. Can you imagine what that man is experiencing in that moment, in the face of a debt that was probably crushing him, a debt that he probably couldn't help himself from thinking about every minute of the day, the debt that was the greatest stress in his life, that he could not envision how he was ever going to pay off, that he was thinking, this debt is going to be a debt my grandkids are still going to be paying. So on one hand, yes, to be forgiven 50 pieces of silver, that was a good day for that guy. That must have felt great. But the guy that loves the one who forgave the debt the most is the guy who was forgiven the most. He is the guy, as I said, that's literally doing the cartwheels in the parking lot, who can't wait to get home and tell his family how amazing this good news truly is. In fact, what is Jesus saying? He's saying, Simon, you know, there's a very personal message here. You didn't do any of this. In other words, you didn't do, out of any kind of feelings towards me, any gratitude towards me, any love for me, you didn't do what was just the expected custom of that time in terms of having a servant wash my feet. But this woman, you know, who you only see through the label of, oh, she's immoral, she can't hold herself back. She can't stop herself from literally pouring out her tears, her gratitude, her love towards me. In fact, this is how you often know the difference between wearing the label of religion and living a life that is constantly focused, that is constantly empowered, that is constantly transformed by being drawn over and over again back to what it means to be captivated by Jesus. You live your life from an entirely new, an entirely different set of motivations. Not always obvious in a bunch of religious activity, but rather the evidence is in these outrageous acts of love and devotion. So let's ask the question, you know, here's this immoral woman who all of a sudden has her life much more defined by the label radical act of devotion and love. And you have this Pharisee, this expert in religion, who now wears the t-shirt, who now has the label, the badge, perhaps a religious response to love. What is the source of captivation? They both have a source of captivation. But what is the source of captivation, as we said at the beginning? What is the source of captivation that truly transforms our life, allows us to to begin to live our lives on an entirely different level. In a sense, puts our life into right perspective. Well, notice the actions of this woman. The first act went like this. She came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. And as she stood behind Jesus at his feet weeping, she said, I have a feeling, as she stood behind him at his feet weeping, I have a feeling that this is not the way that she thought the whole experience was going to play out beforehand, when she thought about it beforehand. In fact, when you think about what's happening here, she really just can't stop herself. She just cannot contain herself. She cannot hold herself back. That there is something about Jesus, or something about the person of Jesus, the beauty of Jesus, the presence of Jesus that has completely captured her. She is captivated by Jesus, and that captivation, it literally has transformed who she is. But there's a second act. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. And then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. Now, we don't know what kind of perfume this was, but with reference to the alabaster jar, the chances are it was not your corner drugstore variety. In fact, if it was a perfume, a substance called nard, as many believe that it was, then the value of this nard, this perfume, was equal to about a year's worth of salary, a year's worth of earnings. You just think about that. You take your salary for the year and you purchase this perfume and you just pour it out over the feet of Jesus. Your annual income that goes to, your mortgage, to your food, to your groceries, to your taxes, to your leisure, everything that would support you over the year. You take it and you buy this perfume and you literally just pour it out over the feet of Jesus. There's your year's income. It's gone, right? It's just like that. It's gone. Oh, could you do that? Would you do that? See, whether it's perfume and all it symbolizes, whether it's money and the way that money has of kind of making us feel that that's our security or that's our happiness, whether it's love, could you give it to Jesus? Would your gratitude lead you to go, here, Jesus, you take it all. You have it all. See, we all have something that is personal. It's personal to us, and it often is beautiful and good. I mean, I like perfume. I'm always a little bit like, when I go into these places like no scent allowed, I'm kind of like, what do you mean no scent? There's like a perfume that I've bought Sandy over the years, and whenever I smell that perfume, it's just like, it just takes me right to Sandy. I'm grateful that over the years I've been able to put a little bit of away for retirement savings. A little bit of security, if you will, for my old age. In the distant future when that day comes. And I don't know where I would be without Sandy and the kids and their love and their support and the encouragement that they have shown and expressed to me through the years. But the difference between Simon and his life that is dark with religion and this woman who is so grateful to Jesus is that being captivated by Jesus leads her to willingly and gratefully surrender everything. Surrender and give everything. It just flows out of her. And notice, not to somehow try and earn Jesus' forgiveness or his love, but to know and to experience and express how grateful she is to be forgiven, and the experience of how deeply and completely and radically and sacrificially Jesus loves her. It is a response to who Jesus is and how she has experienced Jesus. It's like being captivated by Jesus obliterates her label. And love and gratitude just flow out of her. And her life is now transformed through being captivated by Jesus. How about you? How about you? Notice what Jesus says to religious Simon. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins, he's talking about sin now, recognizing, okay, this was her life. Her many sins have been forgiven as her great love has shown. As her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little loves little. Then Jesus said to her, your sins are forgiven. But what's Jesus saying? That in so many ways, life is all about what captivates us. So what captivates you? Like right now, what is it that's turning your head? What is it that's attracting you? What is it that's winning you over? And what is that attraction doing for you? Where is that attraction taking you? Would you say that there are ways in which what you are captivated by has actually begun to define your life? That what you're captivated by actually has put even a label on you? Jesus is saying that what captivates you is evidenced by your life. This woman became captivated by Jesus. She knew her label. She lived under the weight of her label. She was honest about her label. But through being captivated by Jesus, had her label erased. And the behavior that went with the label was forgiven. Jesus says, I forgive you. And my forgiveness is obvious. How? Obvious by the response in your life. That's the lesson that Jesus was teaching to Simon and to us. We could say it like this. If we have an awareness, I know we don't like to talk about it, but if we have an awareness of what the Bible calls sin, when you recognize sin, when you're willing to be honest about sin, to recognize sin, how horrible it is, how it separates us from God, how it wreaks such incredible havoc in our relationships with others, the vertical and the horizontal, then it is actually living with a big awareness that leads us to understand what it is we're captivated by and how what we're captivated by literally has influence over our entire life. So this is what I'm trying to say. See, the morning after, I came to understand that Jesus was exactly who he claimed to be. And I asked Jesus to forgive me and be the leader of my life. That when I opened the door to step out for a run, it was like I was stepping into an entirely brand new world. An entirely brand new day. That everything had changed. In many respects, it was kind of like I had been stuck in this room. Kind of like, some movies. You're in this room, and this room is dark, and it's gloomy, and maybe the room's like your biggest nightmare, and you're stuck in this space. But then you find this door, and you open that door up, and all of a sudden, like that, you are transported to this entirely different reality. You're experiencing life in an absolutely radically different way. That here you are in the rain and the dark and the cold, and you open the door and you step through, and it's like, there you are. Boom. You're laying on the beach in Maui, or you're swimming with the turtle, whatever it is that makes your heart zoom. You're swimming with the turtles off the beaches of Maui. And when I went out for that run that next day, after putting my faith and my trust in Jesus, it was like it was a brand new world. The sun had never shone brighter. The sky was never bluer. And perhaps most of all, it's like this weight that had been pressing down on me, this weight that I was carrying, like that debt, that 50 pieces of silver that was crushing that guy, that it was suddenly gone in that moment. It was completely gone, and I experienced like a weightlessness that I never had imagined I could experience in life. Jesus' forgiveness is an incredibly liberating thing. It helps us to shed the labels that have this way of boxing us in and defining us, and it enables us to live in this awareness of how amazing it is that Jesus was, first of all, the one who is captivated with us, and that his captivation for us led him to make the greatest sacrificial act of love that this world will ever know. The greatest sacrificial act of love that you and I can ever know, by shedding his blood on a cross as a display of how deeply and radically and completely he offers us forgiveness and love. Now, when you experience Jesus' love and forgiveness, there is a revolution, a transformation that begins in your life that radically impacts your actions of devotion and love. And just think that whenever we start feeling like our lives are a lot more about religious action than anything else, that we have the antidote. Jesus says that if we come to him, for the first time, but over and over again, then we will live our life out of a place of deep gratitude, expressed in radical acts of devotion and love. A life that literally it flows out from being captivated by Jesus.